What if I told you Meghan Markle was seen on her knees in front of King Charles, pleading for forgiveness, as Prince William turned his back in disgust? A cold wind rattled the tall hedges surrounding Windsor Castle. It was mid-morning, but the gray skies and the silence that blanketed the estate gave the day an almost eerie stillness. No royal engagement was scheduled. No cameras were expected. But something extraordinary was unfolding behind those thick stone walls. Two figures had arrived unannounced, escorted not by grandeur or royal procession but discreetly, by blacked-out vehicles under the guise of silence. Inside those cars sat Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, returning not in triumph, but in something the world never thought they'd see: surrender. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Only a few years ago, Harry and Meghan had boldly stepped away from the monarchy, announcing that they were choosing freedom over duty. In their words, they wanted a life of independence, privacy, and the opportunity to chart their own path. Their explosive interview with Oprah had driven a wedge between them and the royal institution, and by extension, Prince William and King Charles. They told the world about alleged racism, abandonment, and mental health struggles. The world watched in divided fascination as the Sussexes left Buckingham Palace behind to establish their American dream in Montecito, California. They built a brand. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Spotify, Netflix, and Penguin Random House. They launched the Archwell Foundation and branded themselves as social justice advocates, mental health warriors, and modern royalty for the digital age. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. Projects floundered. Criticism mounted. The image of a glamorous royal couple saving the world gave way to skepticism and accusations of hypocrisy, opportunism, and tone-deaf extravagance. Then came the downward spiral. The Spotify deal ended in public embarrassment. A senior Spotify executive publicly labeled them grifters. Netflix began cutting ties. Book sales plateaued. Archwell's impact became difficult to measure, and donors began backing away. Their public appearances became fewer, their smiles tighter. Whispers of internal turmoil leaked into the press. Rumors swirled about financial instability, staff exits, and even tension within the marriage itself. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared the world for what would come next. They returned to the very family they once criticized. But not as prodigal royals making a victorious comeback. No, they came back in desperation. And what unfolded shocked the monarchy to its core and left a permanent stain on their legacy. Sources close to the palace claimed the meeting had been requested weeks prior through intermediaries. Meghan had allegedly written a letter directly to King Charles, described as humble in tone but pleading in content. Harry followed up through a private channel previously reserved for emergencies. No grand speech, no press alert. Just a quiet, urgent plea. Let us back in. Even temporarily. We want to make things right. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a calculated, orchestrated effort to re-enter the royal fold, if not symbolically, then structurally. The Sussexes reportedly expressed willingness to resume working roles, attend official events, and even submit to palace communications control. For a couple who had once declared they would never be half in, half out, the about-face was jarring. And yet, King Charles did not grant them a warm welcome. There was no red carpet, no family embrace. Instead, the couple was ushered into a private room at Windsor. Not the main hall, not the stateroom, but a side room often reserved for tense or uncomfortable meetings. What occurred in that room, as revealed by multiple insiders, left both Charles and William stunned, if not uncomfortable. According to one source, Harry and Meghan both lowered themselves in front of the monarch. The gesture, more symbolic than literal, was unmistakable. One aide described it as a moment of theatrical desperation, while another called it painfully sincere. Meghan, usually poised and articulate, was said to have broken into tears mid-sentence. Harry's voice cracked as he addressed his father, using words he hadn't spoken in years. "Your Majesty." They spoke of regret. They spoke of misjudgment. Meghan reportedly admitted they had overstepped in their media campaigns, underestimated the institution's resilience, and wished they could go back in time. Harry confessed to feeling lost, stuck between two worlds, and aware that both were slipping away from him. They offered to give up media deals, to retract damaging statements, and to work under whatever constraints the palace deemed appropriate. "We'll accept any condition. Just give us a chance to start over," Meghan reportedly said, as tears ran down her cheeks. but their pleas met a wall of royal steel. King Charles, while moved by the moment, was not swayed. According to insiders, he thanked them for coming, acknowledged the pain of the past, but made it abundantly clear the institution has moved forward. The family has moved forward. There is no role for you anymore. The bombshell rejection did not stop there. Prince William, often seen as the more reserved and diplomatic one, was described as openly furious during the exchange. While Charles maintained a tone of formality and sorrow, William reportedly raised his voice. "You publicly attacked my wife. You dragged this family through the mud. And now you want back in?" It's said that Meghan tried to defend herself, saying things had been misconstrued by the press, but William allegedly cut her off. "You didn't just damage the monarchy. You weaponized it. You made a global spectacle of our pain." The meeting ended with no handshake, no embrace, no promise of reconciliation. Just silence. A royal silence more deafening than any words. And yet, even as they exited the castle grounds, heads down, expressions hollow, the story wasn't over. Somehow, details of the encounter leaked, perhaps strategically, perhaps by a royal aide unwilling to let the moment fade into secrecy. Soon, headlines blared across the UK, the US, and beyond. Social media lit up with shock, mockery, empathy, and disbelief. Images of the couple, reportedly captured by a distant security camera, showing Harry slouched and Meghan holding tissues, went viral. Sussexes rejected, read the banner on morning television. Royal experts debated the implications, calling it the final nail in their ties to the crown. But a more nuanced conversation was taking shape too. Had the palace been too harsh? Was this not a chance for healing and unity? Or had too much damage been done? Too many bridges burned? The British public was divided. Some expressed a deep sense of satisfaction. They finally got what they deserved, one headline declared. Others felt the pain in Harry's eyes and Meghan's trembling voice and wondered if a small piece of humanity had been lost in the rigid rules of royal protocol. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan returned to the United States without speaking to the press. Not a single statement. No Instagram posts. Just silence. And in that silence, the questions grew louder. What will they do now? How will they survive financially, professionally, and emotionally without royal access? Was this their last attempt to reclaim relevance, or a sincere plea for peace? And perhaps most haunting of all, did they truly understand the magnitude of what they gave up when they walked away? This video will take you through everything. The rise and fall of the Sussex brand, the financial and emotional pressures that triggered their return, the chilling details of the meeting with King Charles and William, and the global reaction that followed. We will also explore what happens next, and why this moment may mark not just the end of Harry and Meghan's royal ambitions, but the beginning of their greatest challenge yet. Because sometimes, the doors we slam shut behind us are the ones we most desperately wish we could open again. The fall of the Sussex brand. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced in January 2020 that they would be stepping back from royal duties, the world was stunned. The couple's declaration, made via Instagram before even informing Queen Elizabeth II in person, signaled more than just a lifestyle shift. It was a complete break from the centuries-old machinery of the British monarchy. They weren't merely moving to North America. They were attempting to build something that had never existed before, a royal brand without the royals. In those early days, it seemed like they might just pull it off. The press coined terms like Megxit, and while the British tabloids reveled in the scandal, Hollywood leaned in with curiosity. A-list celebrities welcomed the couple at galas and private parties. Oprah Winfrey, Tyler Perry, Ellen DeGeneres all lent their support. Meghan and Harry had a built-in fairy tale narrative, oppressed by tradition, scorned by the palace, liberated in California. They were poised to be the protagonists in a new-age royal drama where the crown was replaced by content, and duty gave way to freedom. That freedom came at a high cost. No longer funded by the sovereign grant, the couple was responsible for securing their own income, security, and public image. But they weren't short on offers. Within months, they inked a $100 million deal with Netflix. Spotify offered them $20 million to produce exclusive audio content. They signed a publishing deal that included Harry's memoir, rumored to be worth another $20 million. And they formed the Archwell Foundation, which promised to lead global change with compassion and community at its core. But from the very beginning, something was off. The podcast didn't materialize on schedule. The Netflix content seemed slow to develop. Their philanthropic initiatives were vague, with little measurable impact. Their public image began shifting from trailblazers to opportunists, particularly after the Oprah interview aired in March 2021. While the interview gave voice to their personal struggles, including Meghan's suicidal ideation and claims of racism within the royal family, many viewers questioned the timing, the intent, and the choice to go so public with such private matters. Meghan claimed there were concerns and conversations about how dark Archie's skin might be, but she refused to name who said it. That ambiguity sparked a firestorm of speculation, pitting the couple directly against the monarchy in the court of public opinion. The palace, traditionally silent, responded with the now famous phrase, "Recollections may vary." Their reputation began to shift in two critical arenas, the United Kingdom and the United States. In the UK, public sympathy plummeted. Polls showed a dramatic decline in their popularity, particularly among older Britons who viewed their actions as disloyal and self-serving. Meghan's statements were dissected with clinical skepticism. Harry's role in all of it, his silence, his complicity, and later his memoir, further distanced him from the nation that once adored the spare prince. But the real blow came from the United States, the very place they had chosen as their sanctuary. At first, Americans welcomed the couple with open arms. Meghan was seen as a progressive voice, a biracial woman speaking truth to power. Harry was seen as the supportive husband, shedding outdated institutions for love and integrity. But the narrative began to fray. Spotify was the first to strike a devastating blow. Despite the huge payout, only a handful of podcast episodes had been produced under their Archetype series. The platform eventually severed ties with the couple. One executive went so far as to publicly call them grifters, a label that cut deep and went viral. It signaled a shift. They were no longer viewed as bold disruptors, but as figures failing to deliver. Their Netflix content fared slightly better, with their docuseries drawing substantial viewership. But even that was not enough to justify the massive investment Netflix had made in them. Industry insiders began whispering about underperformance and lack of creative direction. Netflix quietly began distancing itself from further Sussex-led projects. Then came the memoir of Harry's infamous book, Spare. On its release, the book made headlines around the globe. It detailed everything from Harry's frostbitten genitals at his brother's wedding to intimate accounts of his first sexual experience behind a pub. But more damaging than the salacious details were the family betrayals. He accused Prince William of physically attacking him. He painted Queen Camilla as a manipulator. He wrote about private conversations with King Charles as if they were open game for public consumption. It was cathartic for Harry, no doubt. But to the wider world, the book came off less as a declaration of truth and more as an emotional grenade hurled at the monarchy and anyone who still had faith in it. Even supporters began questioning whether the Sussexes were motivated by healing or revenge. It didn't help that multiple claims in the book were fact-checked and found lacking in evidence or plagued by contradictions. Their Archwell Foundation, once seen as a beacon of socially conscious philanthropy, began receiving criticism for vague accomplishments and little transparency. Tax filings showed modest charitable giving compared to the foundation's ambitions. Major donors pulled out or shifted priorities. Meghan's long-awaited return to Instagram never happened, and their rumored film projects failed to find traction outside of gossip headlines. The couple had built a brand on moral authority, but that moral authority now stood on shaky ground. Public perception began to harden. Memes proliferated. Late-night comedians mocked their self-seriousness. South Park aired a brutal parody featuring characters called the Prince and Princess of Canada, desperately demanding privacy while holding signs saying, "We want attention." It was cruel, but it stuck. The parody reflected what many were beginning to believe: that Harry and Meghan didn't know who they were outside of victimhood, and didn't know how to lead a public life that wasn't centered on grievance. Then came the money problem. With their Spotify and Netflix contracts either ended or under scrutiny, and no public income sources to replace them, questions began surfacing. How were they maintaining a multi-million-dollar mansion in Montecito? How were they paying for security, travel, and staff? Whispers of financial strain became louder. Insiders claimed that Meghan had reactivated her Hollywood contacts in search of new opportunities, but few doors were opening. Harry, it was rumored, had begun discussing a second memoir, though the appetite for more revelations was clearly waning. The Sussex brand, once shining with possibility, had become radioactive in many circles. Not entirely irrelevant, but unstable, unreliable, and unsustainable. And that's when the whispers began. The couple, now quiet and out of the spotlight, were said to be planning something. Some speculated it was another tell-all documentary. Others believed they were launching a wellness brand. But palace insiders knew differently. A letter had been sent. A phone call had been made. The couple wasn't planning to reinvent their brand. They were planning to return. But the timing was more than symbolic. Their attempts came just as King Charles solidified his new reign, and Prince William expanded his role within the royal structure. The monarchy had stabilized, modernized slightly, and moved on. There was no vacuum left to fill. No open seat at the table. For Harry and Meghan, once poised to revolutionize royal identity in the digital age, this meant more than just a bruised ego. It meant that their brand, built on proximity to the crown, was now exiled from the very institution that gave it meaning. They had become a brand without a base. Influencers without influence. Royals without a realm. And so they came back. Not as critics or content creators. Not as global activists. They came back as something far more vulnerable. They came back to beg. The triggering event. It didn't happen overnight. There wasn't one single collapse or headline that forced Harry and Meghan to reconsider everything. No thunderclap, no dramatic betrayal. Instead, their world began to crack in slow, steady tremors, each one barely noticeable on its own, but together forming a fault line too wide to ignore. The walls around their carefully curated empire started to buckle under pressure from every direction. Media scrutiny, financial uncertainty, and private despair that no publicist could spin. At first, the signs were subtle. Meghan canceled a red carpet appearance in Los Angeles, citing scheduling conflicts. Harry was noticeably absent from a climate change summit where he was once expected to be the headline speaker. Archewell's website hadn't been updated in months. Social media accounts remained eerily quiet. Those who watched the couple closely noticed something else, a sudden withdrawal from the public eye. For two people who once dominated headlines, their silence was suspicious. Then, an uncomfortable truth began to circulate. They were being ghosted, not by tabloids, but by the very industry they had tried to join. Major networks no longer pitched them for interviews. Brands were reluctant to attach themselves to a narrative that had shifted from royalty to liability. Hollywood, once warm, turned cold. The invitations stopped arriving. And then came the final straw, an unanticipated and deeply humiliating event. According to well-placed insiders, it happened at the 2025 Tony Awards in New York. Meghan and Harry arrived in designer wear, expecting fanfare. Meghan had hoped to network with key entertainment figures for her long-rumored return to acting. But what greeted them instead was a mixture of apathy and open contempt. Cameras turned away. Guests at the entrance ignored them. But the worst moment came not from the press, but the crowd. As they walked the red carpet, a chorus of boos erupted. It started small, but grew quickly. "Go back to Montecito," someone shouted. Another added, "Where are your kids?" The moment was caught on camera and went viral within hours. It wasn't just awkward, it was devastating. More painful than the heckling was the reaction of the Hollywood elite. Instead of intervening or showing support, most turned their backs, literally and symbolically. No producers approached Meghan. No directors spoke with Harry. Their presence felt out of place, almost pitiful. In that moment, the illusion shattered. They weren't American royalty. They were outsiders now, neither embraced by Britain nor adopted by America. Back in California, the consequences became clear almost instantly. A scheduled meeting with a tech investment group reportedly evaporated overnight. Their PR agency, which had represented them since 2021, ended their contract quietly, citing creative differences. Archewell's staff shrank further. Another senior executive resigned. Internally, stress levels soared. One source close to the couple said Meghan was devastated by the incident and saw it as a turning point in how the world views us. Harry, by contrast, reportedly grew more withdrawn and reclusive. But the deeper crisis wasn't about brand perception, it was about identity. For years, Harry and Meghan had defined themselves as victims of the monarchy, survivors of institutional neglect. But what happens when the narrative runs out of steam? When the audience no longer sees you as victims, but as people who chose their exile, monetized their pain, and now find themselves alone in the wilderness. They could not rebrand. Not convincingly. Not without proximity to the one thing that gave them mystique to begin with, the crown. And that realization, harsh and undiluted, is what triggered the decision. The discussion reportedly began one evening at their Montecito estate. Meghan, visibly distraught after reading online reactions to the Tony Awards video, turned to Harry and asked a question that insiders claim stunned him. "Do you think your father would ever take us back?" At first, Harry was hesitant. He had spent years trying to escape his royal identity. But now, stripped of his UK citizenship, distant from his brother, estranged from his father, and largely unwelcome in American high society, he had no anchor. And if he was honest with himself, the answer to Meghan's question gnawed him too. The very next morning, Meghan reached out to an old contact, one of the few remaining figures within the palace who had not turned their back entirely. A discreet channel was opened. A message was passed. And so began the process of arranging a potential meeting, not just with King Charles, but with Prince William as well. But this time, they knew it couldn't be a confrontation. No media interviews, no Oprah, no accusations. It had to be a plea. Meghan agreed to draft a letter, not through their lawyer or PR team, but in her own handwriting. She asked Harry to deliver it to the intermediary personally, a symbolic gesture of sincerity. In the letter, Meghan reportedly wrote that they were ready to make amends, that their past actions were driven by pain, not malice, and that their intent now was to heal old wounds, not for ourselves, but for our children. She asked for a private audience with King Charles and Prince William. No cameras, no advisors, just a conversation. She concluded with a final line that was reportedly written in trembling script. "Please don't let this be the last chance." Harry, for his part, followed up with a call, his first direct attempt at royal communication in nearly a year. When the call was returned 2 days later, it was not from his father or his brother, but from an assistant relaying a message. "His Majesty is willing to meet, but there will be conditions." They were told to come quietly. No staff, no media, and no expectations. The couple accepted immediately. In the days that followed, their home was tense and quiet. Meghan reportedly began preparing for the meeting by rehearsing what she would say. Harry paced the house endlessly. Their security team was instructed to maintain full discretion, and their flights to the UK were booked under aliases. What unfolded next would change their lives and royal history forever. But before that infamous meeting at Windsor could take place, there was one more twist. A former staffer, who had worked briefly for Archewell, leaked a fragment of Meghan's letter to a minor British tabloid. The tabloid published it within hours. Though only a small excerpt was shown, the headline was brutal. "Meghan to Charles. Please don't let this be the last chance." The article exploded across social media. Royal commentators dissected the phrase. Was it emotional manipulation? A genuine appeal? Or a trap designed to reclaim media relevance? Regardless of intention, the leak left Meghan shattered. According to a Montecito neighbor, Meghan was seen walking the grounds of their estate in tears. She looked broken, they said. Not angry, just lost. Harry was livid. He accused their remaining staff of betrayal. But privately, he admitted to friends that the leak had made their already fragile request seem even more desperate. Yet they didn't cancel the meeting. In fact, they doubled down. Meghan rewrote part of her statement. Harry asked a mutual friend to try and reach Prince William again. The couple, once defiant, now found themselves in a position they had avoided for years, asking for forgiveness, not from the press, not from the public, but from the family they had walked away from. The trigger had been pulled. There was no turning back. Secret trip to the UK. In the dead of night, far from the glare of paparazzi lenses and royal correspondence, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle boarded a chartered jet from a discreet private airstrip just outside of Santa Barbara. The aircraft had no royal crest, no flight log that would arouse suspicion, and no hint of the public spectacle this trip might eventually become. Every step of the journey was cloaked in secrecy. They weren't arriving in London for a press tour, charity gala, or red carpet premiere. This wasn't about image building. It was about survival. And they were prepared to risk their pride for a chance at redemption. The journey itself was tense and silent. According to one source close to the pilot crew, the couple barely spoke during the 11-hour flight. Meghan was said to have stared out the window for most of the time, eyes wide but distant. Harry reportedly kept a notebook on his lap the entire time, scribbling notes, perhaps rehearsing what he would say to his father and brother when the moment finally came. Both of them were under the weight of something few outsiders could truly understand: the cost of returning to the very institution they had tried so hard to escape. By the time they landed at Farnborough Airport, dawn had barely begun to break over the English countryside. A Range Rover waited for them on the tarmac, windows tinted, engine running. There were no photographers in sight. Only a small group of trusted palace aides and private security escorted them into the vehicle. Within minutes, they were off, heading west toward Windsor Castle. The drive was long and quiet. Rain misted against the windshield. As they passed through the familiar landmarks, motorways and hedgerows, villages with spired churches, and sleepy petrol stations, Harry reportedly stared out at the countryside that had once been his home. Meghan clutched a manila envelope in her lap, said to contain updated handwritten notes and a revised copy of the letter she had sent King Charles just days before. They didn't go directly to the castle. Instead, they were checked into a secure royal residence nearby, not open to the public, not listed in any official travel record. It was the same secluded guest house that foreign dignitaries had used in the past, nestled behind ancient hedgerows and patrolled by round-the-clock security. Palace insiders nicknamed it the holding room. It was a place where sensitive visitors were housed before facing the crown, one part sanctuary, one part interrogation chamber. There, they waited. Hours passed. No calls. No updates. Only the soft ticking of an antique clock and the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. Meghan reportedly paced the drawing room, rereading her statement over and over again. Harry sat by the fireplace, staring into the embers, hands clasped tightly. Then, shortly after 3 in the afternoon, a message came through. King Charles had agreed to meet, but not alone. Prince William would also be present, and it would not be at Buckingham Palace or Sandringham or even Balmoral. It would be at Windsor, a place dense with history and, for Harry, steeped in both memory and sorrow. It was there he had walked behind his mother's coffin. It was there he had proposed to Meghan in Nottingham Cottage. And it was there, years later, that he would now attempt to beg his way back into the fold. The decision to include Prince William was not accidental. According to sources within the royal household, Charles was torn. On one hand, he still harbored a father's instinct to protect and reconcile. On the other, he knew that any decision made without William's approval would fracture the royal core further. And so he summoned his heir, who agreed, but reluctantly. Security protocol was heightened. Non-essential staff were cleared from certain wings. Curtains were drawn. Aides were instructed not to speak to press under any circumstances. But secrets never stay buried long inside royal walls, and within hours, word began to spread through the palace like a current. The Sussexes had returned. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at 9:30 a.m. In preparation, Harry and Meghan were advised on basic royal protocol, how to address the king, how to enter the chamber, where to stand. Meghan was reminded to curtsy. Harry was reminded not to speak first unless spoken to. The irony, of course, was rich. These were the very protocols they had mocked and dismissed as archaic. Now, they were clinging to them. That night, Meghan reportedly barely slept. She reviewed each paragraph of her revised letter to the king and rehearsed key points she wanted to make. Her voice, her posture, her tone, it all had to be perfect. There would be no press to control the narrative this time. No friendly interviewer to soften the moment. Just raw confrontation. Harry, meanwhile, was tormented by anticipation. Some insiders say he tried calling an old military friend, possibly to seek support. Others claim he walked the grounds alone under the moonlight, his figure cloaked in a dark peacoat, shoulders hunched against the weight of a decision that could not be undone. If this failed, they would have no path forward, no titles, no family support, and no possibility of a return. The next morning arrived with overcast skies and a chill in the air. A discreet convoy collected the Sussexes shortly before 9 a.m. By 9:15, they had entered the rear gate of Windsor Castle. No cameras, no announcements, just one final breath before the plunge. They were taken through the side entrance and led down a narrow corridor lined with portraits of kings past. Meghan reportedly slowed her steps at one point, pausing in front of a painting of Queen Victoria. Harry kept his eyes forward. The room they were ushered into was modest by royal standards, no chandeliers or velvet thrones. Just a long mahogany table, 2 high-backed chairs at one end, and 4 smaller ones opposite. A fireplace flickered quietly at the far wall. At 9:32 a.m., the door opened. King Charles entered first, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. His expression, according to an eyewitness, was unreadable. Prince William followed closely behind, his gaze reportedly cold, jaw tight. There were no greetings, no handshakes. Just an air of formality and unresolved history that filled every inch of the room. The Sussexes stood. Meghan curtsied. Harry bowed. And then, For a few seconds that felt like minutes, no one said a word. It was Charles who finally broke the silence. He gestured for them to sit. They did. The next 2 hours would go on to be described by one palace aide as the most emotionally loaded confrontation in modern royal history. But before any word was spoken, before any apology or request or offer could be made, Meghan reached into her bag and pulled out her revised statement. She slid it across the table, her hands trembling slightly. "This is all we ask," she said softly. The meeting, kneeling, and pleading. The document Meghan had slid across the table was more than a letter. It was a culmination of desperation, strategy, and a carefully constructed plea. Its pages were handwritten, elegantly, yet shakily, bearing the signs of someone who had spent hours perfecting every word, rewriting sentences to soften the tone, and crafting phrases not as demands, but as surrender. On the top of the first page, it read, "To His Majesty and the Prince of Wales, from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex." But no one picked it up. Not right away. King Charles sat quietly, hands clasped in front of him. Prince William didn't look at the document. He was focused solely on Harry. For a few seconds, no one moved. The tension in the room was suffocating. Harry spoke first. "I don't know where to start," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But I need you both to know we didn't come here for attention or forgiveness. We came because we don't know what else to do." There was a heaviness to his tone, far from the confident royal who once stood at Invictus Games or walked red carpets with international media buzzing around him. This was a man stripped of all illusions. His shoulders were stooped. His hands fidgeted. His eyes darted between his father and brother, both of whom sat silently, their faces unreadable. Meghan remained still for several moments. Then, as if the pressure became too much, she stood up, walked slowly around the table, and gently dropped to one knee before King Charles. The gesture stunned everyone in the room. Even the aides posted discreetly outside the door were later told of the silence that followed. This was not protocol. This was not performance. This was something raw, an act that communicated not submission in the traditional sense, but an emotional break. A woman once accused of dismantling the monarchy was now kneeling in front of the man who symbolized it. "I never wanted this to happen," Meghan whispered, looking down. "I was scared. I didn't know what I was stepping into. I didn't understand your world, and I made mistakes." Charles looked at her with tired eyes, but he didn't speak. Prince William, however, couldn't hold back. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice tight and controlled. "You didn't understand our world, and yet you went on television and told the entire planet we were villains," he said. "You dragged my wife. You dragged this family. And now you kneel." Harry's head sank into his hands. "William, please," he murmured. "No, let him speak," Meghan said, rising slowly to her feet. "He has every right to be angry." Her voice didn't carry the practiced tone of a media interview. It cracked with something more human. "I can't undo what we did, but I can tell you that we lost ourselves. We lost the plot. And now, we don't know who we are anymore." Harry finally looked up. "You were right," he said to Charles. "We tried to carve out something new, something independent, but we ended up isolated. Everything we built, it's falling apart." King Charles inhaled deeply but still didn't say a word. He turned slightly toward the fire and stared into the flames. "We came here," Harry continued, "not to be reinstated, not to reclaim titles or privileges. We came here to ask if there is any room for us, even on the fringes. We can help. We can serve. We'll do anything." William scoffed softly under his breath. "Anything?" he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. "Including retracting everything you said? Publicly apologizing? Returning the money you made from selling our private conversations? Would you do that?" Meghan didn't answer. Neither did Harry. That silence said everything. "You want forgiveness," William continued, "but you never once asked what it cost us. Kate cried for weeks after that interview. You painted us as racist, cold, unfeeling, while we sat here with our mouths shut because we had to. Because the crown demanded it." Harry opened his mouth but couldn't form the words. Meghan turned to Charles, trying again. "This isn't about blame," she said. "This is about survival. For our family. For our children." Charles finally spoke. "And what about this family?" he asked softly. "What about the pain this family endured while you, my son, published memoirs and gave interviews, and let your wife frame us as cruel and callous?" Harry stood. "I didn't mean to frame you," he said. "I told the truth as I saw it." "Your truth is not the truth," William shot back. "And you knew it." The air in the room was no longer thick with tension. It was heavy with disappointment. The kind of disappointment that comes not from betrayal alone, but from the realization that even now, even at this moment, trust could not be fully rebuilt. Still, Harry made one last attempt. "I will walk away from all of it," he said. "The book, the shows, the deals. I'll give it all up if that's what it takes to come back into this family." Meghan turned to him, visibly shaken by the offer. Her eyes widened, not in protest, but in disbelief. "Are you saying that?" Charles asked, voice low. "Yes," Harry said. "Everything." There was a long pause. It felt like the room itself stopped breathing. William stood up now. "But only because it's all falling apart," he said. "Not because you miss us. Not because you love this family. You're here because Hollywood shut its doors, and you're hoping Windsor will open theirs instead." That statement hit like a hammer. Harry didn't argue. Meghan looked down. And then came the final blow. Charles rose from his chair, walked to the end of the room, and placed both hands on the mantel above the fireplace. He stared at a framed photo of Queen Elizabeth for a long moment before turning back to them. "I love you both," he said, "but I cannot rewrite history. Nor can I pretend that this institution hasn't moved forward." He gestured softly toward the door. "There is no role for you here, not because we don't care, but because too much has happened." Harry clenched his fists. Meghan closed her eyes. "You may remain in the guest house tonight," Charles added. "But tomorrow, you'll need to return." There were no guards to escort them out. No staff summoned to clean up the scene. Just two people, once global symbols of modern monarchy, standing frozen in disbelief. They had flown across the world, humbled themselves, pleaded, cried, and still, they were turned away. But the worst moment came after they left the room. As they walked down the corridor, Harry whispered to Meghan, "I thought we had a chance." Meghan didn't respond, because she knew, deep down, the answer had always been no. The shocking rejection. The door shut quietly behind them. There was no slamming, no dramatic gesture. Just a soft click that echoed louder than any argument could. For Harry and Meghan, that sound symbolized something final. A subtle, devastating punctuation mark at the end of a plea that had taken everything in them to deliver. The silence afterward wasn't simply the absence of conversation. It was a royal verdict rendered without ceremony. They had been heard, and they had been denied. Back in the guest residence, they didn't speak immediately. Meghan removed her shoes and sat in the corner of the drawing room, wrapping her arms around herself. Harry stood by the window, staring out at the mist-covered trees, his reflection distorted in the old glass. The stillness between them was unnatural, weighted. Two people who had faced the world together now couldn't even face each other. Rejection wasn't new to them. They had endured it in tabloids, in family circles, even among former friends. But this was different. This wasn't a rejection from strangers or cynical critics. This was their family. This was the institution they were born into, and in Harry's case, the only one he had ever truly known. And now it had told them there was no room left. A royal insider later revealed that King Charles's decision hadn't come easily. In the days leading up to the meeting, he had reportedly spent hours in private discussions with senior advisors and his wife, Queen Camilla. There was debate, conflicted emotions. But in the end, Charles was firm. Reconciliation was not possible under the current circumstances. His words to aides were clear: there can be no unity without accountability. And they've offered none. The palace's position wasn't just a matter of emotion, it was about precedent. Letting Harry and Meghan return in any official capacity would not only undermine the monarchy's structure, but also contradict everything Charles had spent the last 2 years rebuilding: credibility, consistency, and trust. After the turbulence that followed Queen Elizabeth's passing, the royal family had entered a period of stabilization. William and Kate had taken on more prominent roles. The public had begun warming to a new royal era. Bringing back two figures who had challenged that very system was simply too risky. More than one senior royal source framed the rejection as a matter of self-preservation. It wasn't personal, one said. It was institutional. Charles had to protect the crown from further upheaval. But to Harry and Meghan, it couldn't have felt more personal. Later that evening, palace staff noted that the guest residence remained dimly lit, with only one small light visible from outside. No food was requested. No staff interactions were logged. The couple reportedly declined breakfast the next morning, choosing instead to pack and depart before dawn. A single vehicle, unmarked and discreet, collected them from a rear gate and drove them to Heathrow under strict security measures. No public farewell. No send-off. Just a quiet departure, like shadows retreating into the fog. In the hours that followed, speculation swirled across media outlets. Something had clearly happened. Journalists pieced together clues from airport sightings, anonymous palace briefings, and security movements. But no official word came from the palace or the Sussex camp. The silence was deafening. Then, a single leak from an insider changed everything. A well-placed source revealed to a senior royal correspondent that during the meeting, Meghan had knelt before King Charles. The source didn't describe it in cruel or mocking terms, they simply relayed it as fact. But once the media got hold of it, the narrative exploded. Headlines read: Meghan kneels at Windsor, plea for royal return rejected. Others were more brutal. Sussexes grovel, royals say no. Within 24 hours, the British tabloids ran wall-to-wall coverage. Photos of Harry and Meghan's somber faces, taken as they left their Montecito estate days earlier, were repurposed as proof of defeat. Editorials dissected every possible reason for their rejection. Was it Harry's memoir? Meghan's allegations? The Oprah interview? The Netflix docuseries? Every misstep was placed under a microscope and tallied like evidence in a trial. Public opinion was divided but largely unsympathetic in the UK. Actions have consequences, read one headline in The Telegraph. The King was right, declared another in the Daily Mail. Across social media, users debated the royal decision with fervor. Some argued that Charles had shown courage by putting duty over family. Others called it cold and heartless. But the one opinion that seemed to dominate, both online and in print, was that the Sussexes had overplayed their hand. And now, the price had come due. In the United States, the reaction was more muted, but not without its own edge. Hollywood insiders whispered that Meghan's failure to re-enter royal circles would make future branding efforts even more difficult. She needed this, one PR consultant said, not just for image, for access. Without the crown, the mystique is gone. That mystique, so carefully curated in their interviews, podcasts, and documentaries, had always relied on their royal connection. They were outsiders, yes, but outsiders with an inside story. Without that bridge to the monarchy, their platform now risked collapse. Privately, Harry was said to be devastated. Multiple sources close to the couple revealed that he had not anticipated the finality of the rejection. One friend said he had hoped for a partial path back, a gesture, anything that would keep the door open. Instead, he was told, both directly and symbolically, that the door had been shut and bolted. Meghan, according to those same sources, took the news with a mix of grief and steely resolve. She had tried everything from charm to humility, from strategy to sentiment, and none of it had worked. Those closest to her say she entered what they described as a period of strategic silence, choosing not to comment publicly while reassessing next steps. She canceled 2 planned events in Los Angeles and postponed a meeting with a potential production partner. In Montecito, the mood reportedly turned grim. Staff at their home described an atmosphere of tension and retreat. Aides were let go. Projects were paused. The couple kept mostly to themselves, avoiding cameras, calls, and public life altogether. And yet, behind the scenes, a question loomed. What would they do now? They couldn't return to the monarchy. They couldn't fully thrive in Hollywood. Their brand was wounded, their options narrowing. Would they disappear from public life entirely? Or would they pivot once more, attempting to rebuild from the ruins of their failed royal return? As one royal commentator put it bluntly, this was not just a rejection of Harry and Meghan as people. It was a rejection of their future as public figures. Without the palace, they're free. But freedom, as they're discovering, can be very lonely. And perhaps most painful of all was this truth. They had asked for a second chance not just for themselves, but for their children. Archie and Lilibet, young, innocent, and now more distant than ever from their royal heritage. The rejection didn't just impact their present. It changed their legacy. For Harry and Meghan, the meeting at Windsor wasn't simply a failure of diplomacy or a misreading of tone. It was a reckoning. A moment when the past caught up to the present and demanded payment in full. Why King Charles said no. To understand why King Charles turned away his youngest son and daughter-in-law during one of the most emotionally charged moments in recent royal history, you must look beyond the headlines and viral footage. This was not merely a family dispute. It was the culmination of years of betrayal, strategy, heartbreak, and duty. The king's refusal wasn't based on one decision, one documentary, or even one interview. It was the final stance of a monarch who had endured blow after blow, each one eroding the foundation of trust until nothing remained but responsibility to the institution itself. To the public, Charles is often seen as a conflicted figure, torn between his role as a father and his duty as a sovereign. He ascended the throne after waiting longer than any heir in British history. When Queen Elizabeth II passed, it marked not just the end of an era but the beginning of a monumental burden. Every move Charles has made since that moment has been scrutinized. His reign, unlike his mother's, began in the full glare of modern social media and a post-pandemic world teeming with skepticism toward institutions of any kind. And at the center of that scrutiny were Harry and Meghan. When they stepped back from royal duties in early 2020, Charles was caught off guard. Contrary to popular belief, he hadn't been fully briefed on their plans. The infamous Megxit announcement dropped without final approval from Buckingham Palace. Overnight, the monarchy was plunged into chaos. Internal discussions had to be rushed, public statements crafted in emergency meetings. The Queen herself was said to be deeply hurt, and Charles, still Prince of Wales at the time, was left to contain a crisis before he had even officially begun his reign. What followed was a slow-motion unraveling of trust. First came the Oprah interview in 2021. While Meghan's allegations of racism and isolation stunned audiences worldwide, it was Harry's passive alignment with those claims that left Charles reeling. The suggestion that a senior royal had questioned the potential skin tone of Archie, a claim Charles believed implicitly pointed to him or Camilla, struck deeply. In private, Charles reportedly told advisors, "They've labeled us without naming us. And in doing so, they've named us all." Still, even then, Charles held out hope. Friends of the family say he continued reaching out to Harry through intermediaries. Letters were exchanged. Aides attempted quiet reconciliation talks. But each attempt was undercut by another revelation, another media appearance, another leak, another project built on the currency of royal scandal. The Netflix docuseries brought it all crashing down. When Harry and Meghan released their 6-part documentary, packed with private text messages, never-before-seen photos, and allegations of palace scheming, Charles saw it as a calculated attack. More than just an emotional airing of grievances, it was a commercially driven assault on the institution he had sworn to protect. One palace source described it as monetizing trauma while publicly denying they were doing so. Charles was particularly offended by the way the series depicted the family as manipulative, cold, and complicit in Meghan's suffering. The editing, the music, the use of slow-motion footage, it was not a documentary. It was a trial, and the monarchy was in the dock. When Harry released his memoir, Spare, the situation became irreparable. In the book, Harry not only recounted private moments between family members, but did so with a tone that oscillated between bitterness and mockery. He wrote about his physical altercation with William. He shared details of personal conversations with Charles. He even spoke of using drugs and losing his virginity in a field behind a pub. The book stripped away any lingering belief that Harry was simply misunderstood. It painted him as someone willing to tear down the walls of his past for the sake of narrative control. Charles, who had endured decades of public criticism, from the Diana years to the Camilla saga, had always shown a willingness to adapt. But this, insiders said, crossed a red line. It wasn't just about family anymore. It was about the crown. And as king, he had a higher obligation. The rejection of Harry and Meghan's request to return to royal duties, even symbolically or temporarily, was rooted in this core reality. The monarchy cannot function on sentiment. It functions on protocol, reputation, and stability. Allowing the Sussexes back into the fold, after everything, would send the message that any royal, no matter how publicly combative or commercially exploitative, could return simply by showing regret. Charles understood the historical weight of such a decision. Monarchs don't just set family policy, they set precedent. And in this case, precedent would be dangerous. To welcome them back would expose the institution to further exploitation. Would Harry and Meghan write another book? Would a return be followed by another televised interview? Could their reconciliation be captured in a future documentary? Charles had to consider not just what the Sussexes wanted now, but what they might do with it later. Additionally, there were legal considerations. The royal family is not just a family, it's a constitutional entity. Their roles, titles, security, and finances are regulated by law, tradition, and public accountability. If Harry and Meghan were brought back in even a minor working capacity, Parliament could demand explanations. Public funds could become a point of controversy. The media would dissect every move. And then there was the issue of trust, or rather, the complete absence of it. Inside the royal household, trust in Harry and Meghan had evaporated. Staff who had once worked closely with the couple had long since moved on. Private messages had been leaked, internal correspondence twisted for public consumption. One former royal aide summed it up plainly: you can't invite someone back into your home after they've written a best-selling book about what they found in your bedroom. Charles also had to consider William's position. As the heir to the throne, William carries more than emotional weight. He represents the future of the monarchy. His public image, his marriage to Kate, and his children are the next generation of the institution. Bringing Harry and Meghan back without William's full consent would fracture the line of succession. It would also suggest that Charles was willing to sideline the future king in order to appease the prodigal son. And William's stance was unambiguous. He had not forgiven his brother for the personal attacks on his wife. He had not forgotten the way Meghan framed Kate as a villain in the Oprah interview. For William, it wasn't about family politics. It was about honor, legacy, and the truth. He reportedly told his father, "If you let them back in, we lose everything we've rebuilt." In the end, Charles made the only decision he could. He chose the crown over sentiment, stability over reconciliation. When he told Harry and Meghan there was no role for them, his tone was not cruel. It was deliberate, measured, and final. He did not raise his voice. He did not blame. But he made it clear, the monarchy cannot absorb chaos. It can weather storms, but it cannot welcome the very storm that nearly unraveled it. Later, behind closed doors, Charles reportedly confided to a senior aide, "I had to choose the crown, and I chose it with a heavy heart." For Harry and Meghan, that decision may have felt like betrayal. But for Charles, it was the burden of kingship. A king cannot save everyone, not even his own blood. Prince William's cold resolve. If King Charles's rejection of Harry and Meghan was framed by the weight of monarchy, legacy, and duty, Prince William's refusal was something far more personal. This wasn't about protecting the institution alone. It was about protecting his family, his wife, his children, and everything that had been dragged through the mud in the wake of his brother's decisions. What shocked some close observers wasn't that William stood firm, it was the level of intensity and finality in his tone. Cold, unflinching, and rooted not in royal protocol, but in a deeper wound that had never truly healed. To understand William's response during the now infamous Windsor meeting, you must look back at the years of erosion that followed Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. It wasn't just that the Sussexes had left, it was how they left, what they said on the way out, and how they continued to capitalize on private pain while expecting public sympathy. The pivotal fracture point came during the Oprah Winfrey interview in March 2021. In the interview, Meghan claimed that Kate had made her cry in the lead-up to her wedding, flipping the long-standing narrative that Meghan had brought Kate to tears. The assertion stunned royal watchers and, reportedly, Kate herself. What made it worse for William was that Meghan went further. She claimed that while the palace worked hard to protect certain members of the royal family, they were willing to lie to protect others, implying that she and Harry were deliberately left exposed. Though Kate never responded publicly, those close to her confirmed that she was deeply upset and felt humiliated. For William, it wasn't just an insult, it was a public assassination of character by his own brother and sister-in-law. He viewed it as a betrayal of Kate's dignity, particularly considering her years of quiet service to the crown and her ironclad loyalty during moments of internal royal turmoil. From that moment forward, William's position hardened. Behind palace walls, he reportedly told his father that reconciliation would be impossible without a full, public apology from Harry and Meghan. Not just behind closed doors, not just to the family, but to the British public, who had been misled. When no such apology came, instead replaced by documentaries, Netflix specials, and a best-selling memoir, William's resolve calcified. Friends of the prince say that in the months following Spare, William became emotionally withdrawn whenever the topic of his brother arose. He refused to discuss Harry in public, and during engagements, any questions related to the Sussexes were met with silence or a redirected smile. In private, however, he spoke with clarity. He made his choice. He told one confidant. He didn't just burn bridges, he bulldozed them. William's anger wasn't limited to Harry. He reportedly saw Meghan as a destabilizing force, a woman who, in his eyes, saw the monarchy not as a duty, but as a brand to be exploited. He believed she encouraged Harry to speak out, and while Harry may have shared those feelings independently, William viewed Meghan as the enabler of the damage. By the time the secret Windsor meeting occurred, William had made it clear to Charles that he would attend only to support the king's decision, not to extend any olive branch. Sources say his demeanor in the meeting was cold, distant, and rigid. He spoke few words, but when he did, they were piercing. "You want to return," he told Harry. "But you never considered what you took when you left." That wasn't just about institutional loyalty. It was about emotional theft. William believed Harry had stolen trust, stolen privacy, and most of all, stolen peace from their family. At the heart of William's fury was a simple truth. He could forgive his brother for leaving the royal family, but not for how he left. Not for using their shared history as fuel for a public narrative. Not for monetizing trauma that didn't belong solely to him. The issue was compounded by Harry's memoir, which William viewed as a breach of sacred trust. The fight over Archie's christening, the private arguments, the confrontation at Frogmore Cottage. Harry didn't just share personal stories. He revealed William's character in ways that could never be erased. "He painted me as the aggressor," William told an insider. "But I stayed silent while he kept talking." William's loyalty to the crown is not simply a role, it's his life's calling. Raised under the direct eye of Queen Elizabeth II, he understood from a young age that his path was not his own. But what makes his resolve toward Harry so unwavering is the intersection of personal grief and royal duty. He watched his mother die young, pursued by press. He bore the weight of public mourning as a child. And in Meghan and Harry's media pursuits, he saw echoes of that same chaotic vortex, public emotion manipulated for profit. He couldn't bear to see the monarchy and his own family become collateral damage again. This is why, during the Windsor meeting, William rejected their proposal with finality. "I don't believe this is about service or repair," he reportedly said. "I believe it's about strategy. You want proximity to the crown because your current path is crumbling." Meghan didn't respond. Harry looked stricken. The room fell silent. Those who were present say William's gaze never wavered. He wasn't looking for an apology anymore. He wasn't offering grace. He was making a statement. For the crown, for Kate, for his children. For William, the cost of allowing Harry and Meghan back wasn't worth any symbolic gesture of peace. Their return could destabilize everything he had worked to restore since the Queen's death. It could compromise the monarchy's integrity, his own leadership, and the privacy of his family. And perhaps, in William's mind, it would send the wrong message to the public, that you can abandon the royal ship, publicly tarnish it, and still be welcomed back aboard when the tides shift. So he said no, not in rage, not in grief, but in clarity. When the meeting ended, William was the first to leave the room. He didn't wait for handshakes. He didn't look back. According to one aide, he walked through the corridor with brisk precision, nodded once at a member of staff, and exited the wing of the castle without a word. That, more than anything, told Harry all he needed to know. This wasn't just about the past. It was about the future. And in Prince William's version of that future, there was no longer space for a brother he once called his best friend. In a stunning turn of events, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle made a secret trip to Windsor Castle, only this time, not with cameras or speeches, but with desperation. Sources say they begged King Charles and Prince William for a return to royal life, offering apologies, promises, and even tears. But what happened inside those palace walls shocked even the most seasoned royal insiders. Why did the king say no? What brutal words did Prince William deliver that left Harry speechless? And what does this mean for the future of the Sussexes? Stay with us. This is the story the palace tried to